This video is made possible by
Hey there! Welcome back to a new episode of Tutorial Tuesday about the remix. In this season I talk about my remix of Zomboy's Here to Stay featuring Lady Chan, which has now been released as a free download on my SoundCloud profile. To go there and download the track, click the link in the description below. Last week I showed you the first part of the main drop, where I talked about the bass patch that I actually made myself and added into this track. Today I want to talk about the other bass sounds that I've added into the drop. Now, as you know, the drop sounds like this. So, if I take away the patch that I explained last week, then you will now have this. So these are all cuts from the loops that were provided in the original track. Let's see if they're still in here. The original loops that were provided for this track, sound like, let's see. Yeah. This is the first loop. And this is the second loop. So you can hear the sounds that I've added into this drop. So yeah, let's talk about this drop. What have I done? So yeah, all the bass sounds in this drop that are not made by me are coming from these samples. And they actually work in sort of like a call and response type way to this patch that I made myself. So you have this patch, and I filled up the spaces in between with other sounds. So to start off, first I have this high wobble, which basically is that high kind of wobble sound. I did nothing else to it, then I added a little bit of sausage fattener just to make them a little bit higher in volume. And basically I wouldn't have had to do this if I would just, you know, make the volume a little bit louder, but I don't know, I did it and it works. So that's everything that there's to it. I've not done any EQing whatsoever to all these cuts because they are actually already quite good EQ'd. So I didn't have to do anything to them. Yeah, so I have this high wobble that is mixed in with this A bass thing that it's this basically coming from the original patch. Now listen, I did change a little bit to this. Let's see what I did. So this is the track, this is the sound, how it came from the pack, and this is how I made it, which is quite a lot more heavy. It's bigger, and I'll tell you what I've done. I've separated the bass sound in two chains within an audio effect rack. The bottom one is the sub, so I could just call this sub for now. And the top one is the mid-range. Now, what I did to it, I basically distorted this bass sound a lot more, and I've added this wow filter. on a band reject vowel comb preset, and it's sweeping basically between an A sound and an O with an umlaut on it, 2 dots above the O. In Dutch we call that an umlaut, but I don't know how that's called in English, but you can basically just see which vowels I used. Quite a bit of resonance, nothing happening on the resonance itself. The envelope follower is triggering the cutoff position, and yeah, nothing, a little bit of overdrive. Brought the mix down a little bit to about 70%, something like that. And that makes this a lot more heavy. Without it, sounds like that. With it, you can really hear what's going on. I also have this LFO on here that is triggering something. I don't know why. I tried it out possibly, but I took it out again. So don't worry about this LFO thing moving. You need to look at the envelope file. You can take over these settings if you want, but I guess it's just the same as the main default preset of wow filters. So next thing I added is I added a camel fat, and with this I did something pretty cool. Of course I have the distortion turned on, and a little bit, I've only added a little bit of a tube distortion, just to make it a little bit warmer in the low frequencies, and I've added a little bit of excita, which really brings in some more high frequencies, so that works really well if your bass sound has 2 less high frequencies. The next thing I did, and this is really cool, is I added a flanger to this bass sound. The rate is pretty low, 0.2 Hertz, which is really goddamn low. And the flanger itself, it has a pretty high amount, 67%. And what that does, it's gonna create some sort of a phasing sound within this patch itself. You can hear that a lot more when I play this part of the track. You hear that, that sort of phasing sound in it. It's a really distinctive sound that a phaser gives you, but it does work really well on mid-range basses. So yeah, that's the 2 patches. These are followed by a track which is basically just another track, only a sausage fattener on here. A little bit more fatness, this one. I found that this bass sound sounded a little bit too quiet, but it's this sound. Basically just, you know, a higher synth kind of sound, but it works really well, because when you listen to both of them, or the 3 tracks in general together, you get this. You see, and that really works well. And then when you add that sound that I made myself in front of it, you're gonna get a much heavier sound. You see? So after that comes the part from my own bass again, that part, and that is followed by a Reese bass patch, or a Reese bass cut. I've done the same thing to it as I've done with the other one I talked about, this one. But this one I only added a camel fat. The camel fat has only tube distortion, so nothing else, just a little bit of tube distortion and some compression. That compression, you know, it makes it sound a little bit fuller and heavier, which for this sound worked pretty well. After that, I have an EQ to basically control these frequencies, so to make it work. I have a separate chain for the sub. I do have a saturator on the sub, and I also have that on this one, I think. Yeah. It's also a saturator on the sub, just to give that sub a little bit more upper harmonics. That works really well to have a sub that punches through on smaller speakers. You really need to saturate a sub bass, because a single sine wave sub is not gonna have harmonics, and thus you will not hear it on smaller systems. So to keep that weight on smaller speakers, saturate your sub bass. Not too much, because you'll lose a little bit of sub for every little bit amount of saturation that you add. So another thing I did to these two tracks, the A bass 1 track and the Reese bass, is I added an Haas effect to the mid-range. Now the Haas effect is really interesting, and I'm gonna give this little preset away very soon on my website. What it is it basically is an audio effect rack with 2 chains, 1 panned hard left and 1 panned hard right, and on one of them there is a simple delay with the time knob mapped to a macro knob of the audio effect rack. What happens is you can basically delay the left or right channel from the other one. So let's say the delay here is at the right channel, so I can introduce a delay in the right channel, so the left channel is gonna play a little bit earlier than the right channel, and by doing that your sound will get much fatter. I've done that on both of these tracks because I really found out that these tracks, they didn't sound too fat and too wide. And by doing this, you're first of all gonna make the sounds a lot heavier, and second of all, you're gonna make the sound feel more stereo than it used to be. So if your sound sounds really centered, really monophonic, this technique can really do wonders and make your bass sound a lot more stereo. So after that, I've added another EQ just to control the low mids a little bit and the mid frequencies, and a limiter, which basically just makes sure that nothing goes above 0 dB. Yeah, another sausage fattener at the end just to bring the level up a little bit. I don't use sausage fattener that much anymore, but when I made this track I was still using it a lot, so bear with me. If you are not familiar, or if you don't like sausage fattener, then just don't use it. I mean, it's up to you, and for this track it sounded great, so I used it. That's the main thing. That resound, it sounds like this. It's not really a distinctive Reese like we know from drum and bass, but in general this sound can be made from a Reese bass. You'll have to make a Reese bass to get to this kind of sound. So that's it for the first part of the drop, actually. I've now talked about this part, so I'll play it to you. So let's move to the next part of the drop. We've got this part. Okay, so what did I do? The first track in here is of course the same one as in the first part, but I did use them in a little bit different timing, as you can see. This one is pretty much the same. It's basically just cuts from the original sample. As you can see when I open up the sample, this is the full loop. And I've basically just took this little part and placed that in front of that one, which comes from the same sample. So it's just a matter of chopping up the individual parts into parts that you like, and then using those in the final track and try to make a new sort of a melody with these chops. This can be quite time consuming, and if you think that you're gonna make a bass line like this in no time, then think again, because you're not gonna do it like that. It takes a long time, and I can tell you, I've had a different drop for about 2 or 3 times before this track was finished. I have that a lot of times. I make a drop until I like it, then start working on the rest of the track, and then afterwards I find out that the drop is not good enough, and I'll totally rearrange the drop and change things to make it work. Sometimes what I do a lot also is when I finish the drop, I export it to audio files. Then those audio files are loaded back into the project, and then those are gonna be chopped up and rearranged until I'm completely happy with how the bassline sounds. That way you have a lot more control over how your final bassline is going to sound, and sometimes when you're just chopping up individual parts and rearranging them, you get these happy accidents that just seem to work so well for the final bassline, and you won't get that effect with MIDI when you're working in MIDI and with patches. So yeah, that's why I like to work with audio. Let's see what's more. These are just all simple chops from the main patches, and I don't want to go too much into detail about it because there's not much to tell about them. One thing that I did though is at this point, you can see right here, it's basically this first one, and I just copied it over 2 times like that. And I don't know, this part together with the drums really works. Yeah, sort of like an introduction to the next part of the track. Because it's a different, or because this is different from the first part of the track, you will get, yeah, how do I say that? Well, because it is different, you get that variation, and that basically introduces that something is gonna happen. Another thing I did is I added this little part, which is basically that part of the track. I just copied that over, put it right there, and I have no sub under that last part. I don't know why, but it seems to work well. It still sounds heavy. I mean, don't want to go too much into detail about that. Yeah. As you can see, the percussion and drums, they all stop at this point. See, that's right at that point they stop. Everything stops. There's nothing in these 2 bars, or 2 beats, sorry. In these 2 beats, there's nothing else than a kick drum and 1 bass sound, that bass sound, and of course the vocal. Let's see, no. Yeah, this one. Because this part of the vocal really introduces you to the next part of the track. So yeah, that's it for all these separate elements in the drop. It took me 2 videos, but I think I've gone quite in depth about how I structured the actual drop of this track. There is gonna be another 2-part video about the drop, or maybe a 1-part video later on in this tutorial series, because the second drop, or the second part of the main drop, is a variation on the first part. I don't have too much time today, so I'm not gonna talk about that today, and there's actually another part I wanna talk about first. But next week I dive into the sort of like the breakdown, the synth breakdown that's in this part of the track. So this was the 5th in a row of special videos about this remix. For all your questions, click the bottom left to tweet them to @ARTFX Studios, and I'll answer them as soon as possible. Or click the bottom right and become a member of the ARTFX website to share your music, give to and receive feedback from other users, and just have a great time on the forum. Subscribe for more tutorials and have a nice day. See ya!